Welcome to the Transformation Church podcast, where we're leading people into a transforming relationship with Jesus. We hope this message inspires you, builds your faith, and gives you a fresh perspective on God and His Word so you can see transformation in your own life. Enjoy the message.
We've been in this series called Unstoppable the last few weeks, and I want to kind of lean into today's talk with a question that I want to kind of throw out there to you. Have you ever faced a situation where you felt completely overwhelmed? Like it just felt like the walls were pushing in around you, struggled to really understand how in the world that you can get out of the situation that you're in. Maybe today, you walk in here and, been struggling with your marriage. Maybe there's been just a lot of fighting going on. Just you guys don't feel like you're on the same page. Maybe for you, there's just some hurt, some wounds from some friends that were close to you, and now you're struggling to be able to extend some trust in that area. Or maybe for you, it's the pressures of life. Like we all, especially in the holiday season, we feel just the pressure of life come against us. Maybe for you, it's a financial thing, and just having a hard time getting ends to meet, and you keep doing everything that you know to do, but nothing really seems to change. Or maybe it's a dead-end career, and you just don't know where to go, what to do. You don't like where you're at, but you don't have really a whole lot of options beyond where you're at. Or maybe you find yourself kind of in an emotional kind of cave, dealing with anxiety and depression, with us having the holidays. Maybe you lost somebody that was really close to you this year, and just trying to wrap your head around what it looks like to have a Christmas for the first time without them. It can be challenging. It can be tough. Maybe today it's your relationship with God, that it just feels not really even distant, like it just feels like God is absent, like He's nowhere to be found in the situations and the things that you're wrestling with. And if you're anything like me and you find yourself in an impossible situation like that, the easy thing to do, the thing that we all naturally kind of do, is we begin to look at what we don't have, what's missing in whatever the situation is in our life, and we kind of make this assumption that if we just had more of whatever that thing is, then our problem would be gone. But here's the problem that I think we all face with that kind of mindset, is that life doesn't always give us more, does it? Like we can spend a lot of time feeling like if we had more money, if we had more happiness in our marriage, if we had more time to rest, if we had more time with kids, like we kind of build that up. If we just have more, then life would be better. But life usually doesn't give us more. And so today I want to kind of throw out this idea that what if the solution to the season that you're in right now doesn't really have anything to do with more of what is a deficiency in your life, but what if the solution is actually something a little closer than you think? What if the solution is right there at your fingertips, but you've just not quite identified it yet? Today, I want us to venture into a story out of 2 Kings chapter 4. It's a story about a woman who's faced with an impossible situation. No way possible for her to be able to fix the predicament that she's in. But she discovers something along the way that I think God would have all of us discover today if we're facing a difficult situation. And that's that our breakthrough is actually closer than we think. And so today, as we kick into week 4 of this message series called Unstoppable, we've been on this journey trying to discover what it looks like for us to be unstoppable in life, to be unstoppable as a body of believers, and what God is wanting us to do as a church. And we talked in week 1 about having an unstoppable faith and what that looked like. And then in week 2, we talked about the importance of having unstoppable compassion, that that we've got to come to a place in our life where we don't get so consumed with what we need that we miss the opportunities to meet other people's needs. Last week we talked about kind of a challenging one, which is what it looks like to have an unstoppable mindset, and that the way that we think about ourselves and the way that we think about our situations, that it matters. And today I want to continue this kind of train of thought of unstoppable. Today I want to talk to you from this title, Unstoppable Courage. Like what it looks like for us when we're faced with a difficult situation or season, what it looks like for us to have the courage to walk through it and to get through it. So today, if you got your phone with you, if you pull that out, you can tap the seat back in front of you to follow along with the notes today. I was made aware this week that in the last several weeks that we've been doing that we've had almost 3,000 taps to that page. So it's obvious that you guys are finding benefit in being able to check in with everything that's happening around TC and to be able to follow along with my notes. So go ahead and tap the dot and you can follow along with the message today. We're going to be looking in 2 Kings chapter 4. And I love this story partly because in this story, God helps us see something that I think can give us great perspective in whatever season that we're facing. And here's what he helps us see is that God doesn't look at what we lack and see failure, but he looks at what we have and he sees potential. And this is something that you and I have to really kind of settle in our heart, because if you're anything like me, you focus a lot on what you lack and you evaluate yourself and your life based off of that. And what we're going to see in the story is we see the prophet named Elisha, and Elisha is a prophet to the nation of Israel. This is not a pastor to a local church. This is a pastor to a nation. And a widow woman who is in desperate need comes to him, and she's in a situation that she can't fix on her own. And what we see in this story and how it plays out, I think will be an encouragement to you today if you find yourself in a difficult season. Let's take a look at what it says in chapter 4, starting in verse 1. It says, one day the widow of a member of the group of prophets came to Elijah, and notice this word right here, that she cries out. This word in the original language it's not just feeling a little bit of emotion about what she's walking through right now. This is a desperate cry. Like when you look at that original word, it's the kind of cry of screaming out where people all around you can hear you. And it really is an outpouring of the pain and the desperation that this woman is experiencing in this moment. Here's what she says. She says, my husband who served you is dead. And you know how he feared the Lord, but now a creditor has come threatening to take my 2 sons as slaves. There's a lot happening here in this one verse that I think is important for us to grab, to have some handles on. Here's a woman of faith who had a husband that loved God, that served God, and he unexpectedly dies, and it puts her in a very difficult situation. This woman's got 2 kids, but the 2 sons are too young to work. And in that culture, women didn't really work outside of the home. And so she does what most of us do when we're in a difficult spot and we don't know what to do. She just tries to figure something out. And so she goes and she borrows money in order to be able to put food on the table. And now all of a sudden, a certain amount of time has gone by, and now all of a sudden this creditor is coming back to her wanting payment, and she has no way to be able to make that payment. And back then, the culture was if you owed somebody a debt and you couldn't pay it, they could come and they could take your sons as slaves as a form of payment. And so here you've got a woman that, I think that for a moment, if we could put ourselves in her shoes, you got a woman who has done nothing wrong to get her to the situation that she's in. Her two sons are too young to work. She's borrowed money. Now the creditor is coming back. Her two sons are really her financial stability for the future because she can't work on her own. And now she has no idea what to do and no way to be able to solve the problem that she's in. And so I want you to see what Elijah says to her in verse 2. Here's what he says. And I find this kind of fascinating. What can I do to help you? The reason why I find this fascinating is because Elisha is a prophet to the nations. This is a man who just in the previous chapter had been in the same room with three kings and helping three kings solve a problem that they were facing. And now all of a sudden, he's being approached by a desperate woman who has no idea how to fix her situation. And he could have easily responded to her in such a way of, listen, I got bigger things to deal with than this situation. I'm dealing with national problems, not local problems, but he didn't do that. And I think it gives us perspective to God's heart with whatever we're walking through today, and that is that God sees every person and he sees every situation and it matters to him. And so I don't know what your situation is and whether you feel like it's insignificant, it's too small for God, but I think this story helps us see that that's not the case. Now watch what Elisha says to her in the next part of this verse. He says, "What do you have in the house?" And this is another powerful question that he asked because it gives us insight into a principle that you and I need to understand about the kingdom of God. And here's what the principle is that what you have is all you need when you put it in the right hands. That he's setting her up right now for a miracle, and she doesn't even realize it yet. Now notice her response to this question, because you and I do this all the time. We do this all the time. Notice what her response is. When he asked her, "What do you have in the house?" her response is, "I have nothing at all." And then she says, "Except a flask of oil." Now here's what she did in this moment. She focused on what she didn't have, and she minimized what she did have. Friend, you and I do that all the time in our life. Think about the problem that you're facing. Think about the scenario, and if you're anything like me, you've been thinking, if I could just have more of this thing, that it would solve the problem, and you've been minimizing what you do have and kind of negating the other. And I want you to watch what happens in this next verse as Elijah begins, go back if you can, as Elijah begins to set up this next idea that her breakthrough is going to be connected to the very thing that she keeps overlooking in her life. And could it be that the breakthrough that God is wanting to do in your life, could it be connected to the very thing that you keep overlooking in your life? He says this in the next verse. Elijah said, "Borrow as many empty jars," notice this here, I'll get to that in a second, "as you can from your friends and your neighbors." Next verse says this in verse 4, "Then go into your house with your sons and shut the door behind you." He says this, take what you've been overlooking, take what you've been minimizing in your own life, take that and pour that olive oil from your flask into the jars, setting each one aside when it's filled. Now, think about this moment, and again, put yourself in her shoes for a second. Think about how embarrassing and humbling that would have had to be for her to walk up and down the street in her neighborhood, knocking on doors, asking for empty jars, having to field the questions of the people of that home of, what do you need an empty jar from? And she can't really give them an answer because she doesn't know what the empty jar is for. She just knows she's been told to do it. And then he begins to tell her to pour what little she has. Well, that, I don't know about you, but I'm a logical, rational kind of guy. And so I would think that she had to begin to wrestle with doubt and uncertainty of, she's fully aware of what she doesn't have. She's fully aware that she has just a little bit of oil, and now she's being told to get these jars and to put them on the table, and she's got to pour out what little she has, and the assumption is that there's going to be more oil that's going to come out, and it's going to fill the jars, and she had to have had this moment where she began to question, like, this doesn't make sense. Why me? Like, I wonder if she looked at Elijah and made some sort of statement like, listen, I've got a money problem, not an oil problem. Why are you asking me to do this? And then we see a pivotal moment in her life in this next verse. I say it's pivotal because she had two options. She could allow doubt and uncertainty to determine the steps that she took, or she could trust God even though it didn't make sense. And these 5 words right here became a pivotal moment for her and her life. That she did as she was told. And it makes me wonder in our life how many miracles that we miss out on that God is trying to do in our situation because we allow doubt and uncertainty to keep us from doing what we were told. I've kind of learned in my journey of following God that the difference between mayhem and miracles is this. The less I do what God is prompting me and leading me to do, even when it doesn't make sense, the more mayhem I experience in my life. But the more that I say, God, this doesn't make sense, taking what little I have, putting it in all these jars, like it makes absolutely no sense to me, but I'm going to do what I've been told to do anyway, leads to miracles. And that's what this woman's going to find out in her own experience. That she does what she's told, and her sons kept bringing jars to her, and she fills one after another. And in verse 6, it says, soon every container was full to the brim. Now, you and I see a verse like that, and we know the full story, and we're 3,000 years or whatever removed, but when you're living it, this hits a little different. Because every time that she took her jar of oil and had to pour it out, she was able to see what little she had and see all the containers on the table that was supposed to fill. And everything from a logical perspective would say there's no way that can happen. But yet she still had to proceed and take step after step after step of pouring out what was in her jar to the next. And this verse right here, I think this word specifically says something, because you and I, so many times, we'll pour out, we'll go grab some jars, and and we'll pour a little bit out, but when it doesn't happen at the speed that we think that it should happen, we stop pouring. Soon doesn't mean instantaneous. Soon means that there was a process. And every pour required an additional step of faith. And notice what happens next in this verse, in verse 6. She fills up all the jars that she can visibly see in front of her, and then she says to her sons, "Bring me another jar." And notice this, her son said, there's not any more. That's all the jars that we collected, and then it says that the olive oil that has stopped flowing. And I think there's something in this verse that you and I need to recognize, is that the oil didn't stop flowing because God didn't have enough provision for the moment. The oil stopped flowing because they didn't have enough jars for the moment. It's a reflection of the type of faith that we have when God calls us to step out into unknown territory and to do something that doesn't make sense. And what's that degree of faith? Because God doesn't have a provision problem. Oftentimes the difference between mayhem and miracle in our life has nothing to do with God's provision, but everything to do with our lack of trusting that God will do what he says he'll do, even when it doesn't make sense to our logical minds. I want you to see this in the next verse, in verse 7, because I think this is pretty interesting too. That after that happened, she told the man of God, and here's what he tells her to do. He tells her to go sell the olive oil. I don't know if you've kind of caught this at this point yet, but this is the first time that he mentions to her why she's doing what she's doing. This whole process and the steps that she's had to take up to this point were without understanding why she was being asked to do what she's doing. And then this next part is, to me, is just crazy because it shows the heart of the Father in the situation that we find ourselves in. He says, go sell the olive oil, and here's what you're gonna do with it. You're gonna use it to pay your debts. You're gonna pay the creditors off that you owe money to. And your sons, well, you guys are gonna be able to live on what's left. Here's why I think this is so amazing. This woman approached Elisha able to see the crisis that she was currently in. The crisis was she had a debt that she couldn't pay, and if she didn't get it paid, she was going to lose her sons, which would not just fracture the family, but it would destroy her financial stability for the rest of her life. That was the crisis she could see, and God met that crisis. But there was another crisis that this woman was about to experience that she couldn't see, and that was her financial stability moving forward. And God, in his love and compassion, provided not just to the need that she could see, but provided to the need that she couldn't see. And friend, God does that in our lives. That when we trust God and he begins to call us into waters, uncharted waters, and in areas of our life that don't make sense, that we doubt and we wrestle with, as he begins to do that, he's not just trying to provide for the crisis we're currently in, but here's what I like to say, we can see down the road, but God can see around the corner. He can see what you can't see, and trusting him, not only will he come through in the crisis you're experiencing, but he's also gonna provide for the crisis that you can't see. And so what does this look like? what does this look like in our life? How do we take a story like this and how do we put handles on it so we know how to apply this in our own lives as we walk out today? I want to give you two quick takeaways. The first one is this, is that small steps can lead to big breakthroughs. That you and I need to recognize that small steps can lead to big breakthroughs. And maybe for you today, a small step, if you're struggling in your marriage, if you feel like you're on a different path and you're crossing each other and you're fighting all the time, maybe the small step for you is an apology. One of the things that I find interesting about the story is that she had to go gather empty jars, which meant most likely in those homes they would either have to pour out what was already in there, or it was just kind of some discarded jars that nobody was using or paying attention to. And so many times in our life, we ask God for more in our life, but we come to Him already full, with no room for Him to do anything in. And could it be in your marriage today that it's emptying out the pride in your life in order to take this thing that you keep overlooking and minimizing, which is an apology, and to give it? Maybe for you and your finances and the wrestle with that, maybe what God's calling you to do is to take a small step that doesn't make sense, which is how I'm not able to make ends meet now, and now God, you're asking me to step out in faith and to be faithful and to prioritize your kingdom. Like, it doesn't make sense. Or maybe you've been inviting some people. There's some people that cross your path, some people that you know are hurting and they need Jesus. And maybe you asked them to church one time and they shot you down. And so now you've kind of pulled back and now you're not asking anymore. And could God be saying today that, listen, a small step, ask again. Friend, you and I would be amazed at how our insignificant thing that we often overlook in our lives, put in God's hands, can create amazing transformational moments in our life and the life of others. And I came across the story this week, a powerful story that really is a reminder of this idea, this principle that I want to share with you today. So over the next couple minutes, I want you to turn your attention to the screens and I want you to hear Brittany's story today.
I always went to church as a kid, and it was just kind of something that I just always did. The older I got, the more I really started to question things. Kind of turned my back on the whole thing. I had that idea that if this is what it looks like to be a Christian, I don't want to be a part of it. And I kind of went off and did my own thing, and that's where a lot of my life just completely fell apart. It had a good severing between my parents and I. And I jumped into the first relationship that I could get into, which was the biggest mistake of my life. Ended up walking into a situation that turned extremely abusive. Shortly after he and I had gotten together, my grandfather had passed away. I had gone back to Arkansas for the funeral, and like all hell broke loose within my family. And because everyone found out that I was living with this guy, and it was so bad that when I came back from that funeral, I had a message left on my phone from my mom saying that as far as she was concerned, I was no longer a part of the family and she could care less if I were dead or alive. And that was the moment that I quit paying attention to anything, and it progressively got worse and worse and worse, to where it was pretty much on a daily basis. It was almost like something in him completely snapped. If I would make him mad, he would beat the crap out of me, and then he would turn around and punish the kids, and then he would throw it all on me, like, look at what you did. If you hadn't done X, Y, and Z, this wouldn't have happened. And I confronted him on it. And it turned extremely bad, very, very violent. He ended up going out and getting a video camera that he put up in the apartment. And when he was gone, all three of us, myself and his son and his stepson, would have to stay in 3 separate places in the apartment. I tried leaving one time and he came home early and caught me, and I didn't try it again. And I will regret that for the rest of my life. His stepson ended up dying at 7 years old, and I ended up with a 48-year sentence. So my time coming into prison has been very broken. I had reached a point where I finally just said, God, if you were there, you would have stopped it, or you would have done something, or you would give me some sort of peace, or you would give me guidance, or you would give me something, and you haven't given me anything. And I feel like everything that I was brought up in was all a lie, and it didn't happen, and it didn't exist. And a girl that I had known for a long time was one that finally, she started bugging me, let's go to God Behind Bars, it's this church service. And I was like, no, I'm not gonna go. I don't want anything to do with any of that. And she kept pushing, and finally I was like, okay, just so that you'll shut up, I'll go. And everything goes dark, and praise and worship starts, and I just started bawling. And I didn't even know why I was bawling. I just had completely lost it. And it was like this moment of, I had never felt the presence of God like I did that night. And that was my moment when I knew that God came. I didn't have to go to him, he came to me. And he basically said, you are my daughter, and I love you, and that's never gonna change. And I'm here, you've been calling out to me, you've been asking for me, I'm here. And it's never been the same since. I have seen so many things happen, and so much restoration within my family, within friends. He's given me a strength in myself that I never would have thought that I could have. He has shown me that I am someone that's important, that I am someone who is worth it.
What a powerful story. I hear a story like that, and it starts with one small step, a persistent invite. And it's coupled with a group of people somewhere seeing an opportunity to create space for God to move and to make a difference. That got Brittany to the point of transformation in her life. And it makes me just kind of wonder sometimes, imagine what God could do through people that were willing to pour what little they had. Today I want to give you just a couple quick practical kind of action steps to this first point in what we just saw. And it's first, as you heard before, it's inviting somebody to the Christmas Eve service. Listen, Jason mentioned it, 80% Christmas and Easter, 80% of the people will say yes to an invite because our culture is kind of indoctrinated that those two, if you don't go to church, those are the 2 Sundays that you do go. And for Brittany, it was somebody who had gotten turned down that continued to persistently invite, that ended up leading to her transformational moment. And what if God wanted to use you in that way in somebody's life? It's more than just being transformed and spending eternity in heaven, but it's a transformation of families. It's a transformation of relationships with kids. An invite. Who knows what God can do with a simple invite? But I think another practical thing that we've been talking about the last several weeks around here is the Christmas legacy offering. And, we announced 4 weeks ago that we're excited that next year we've been given the opportunity to be able to start a second location of Transformation Church, and that we've decided to start that location in one of the area prisons. And And we believe that God is leading and orchestrating. It's been amazing to see all the people that God has been bringing to the surface that have a similar heart and a desire to be involved and to make a difference. But at the end of the day, it doesn't happen without resources. And my challenge to you is to not overlook what you might have. That God might want to use whatever that is that put in his hands can make an eternal difference in somebody's life. But not only do we need to look at the small steps of faith, but the second takeaway that I want to leave you with today is understanding that your breakthrough begins where your understanding ends. It really is the difference between mayhem and miracles. So many of us live in mayhem because we're unwilling to step outside of what makes sense to us. I think about this woman and I think about her story, and it was what made sense to her that got her into the situation that she was in the first place. But with an act of courage, even though there was plenty of doubt and a lack of understanding, it was a courageous step that opened the door for God to do a miracle in the situation she saw and the situation she didn't. Friend, this is what I've learned about my own life and my own journey is this, in this next statement, that God lets us reach the end of our own options so we're finally ready to embrace his. Friend, most of our life, if we look in the rearview mirror, is because the pain, the mayhem that we experience, the impossible situations, is because we keep doing what makes sense to us. And could it be in this moment that God is trying to help you get bigger perspective around the idea that what little we have, he sees as potential, not failure. And that if we put it in his hands, he's the God that can do exceedingly, abundantly, above all that we might ask, think, or I love this in the Message version, imagine. Would you bow your head with me today? I want you right now in the stillness of this moment, I want you to just kind of open your heart and open your ears to the Holy Spirit in this moment, because my guess is that for some of you, God has been asking that question to you lately. What do you have? And I don't know what your situation is. Maybe it's money like this lady, but maybe it's your marriage. Maybe it's with your kids. Maybe it's your career or your mental health, or I don't know what it is, but the principle still applies, is that chances are you've been focusing on what you need more of. You've been saying, God, more, and God's saying to you today, no, pour. What you've been minimizing in your life, God's saying, I want to use that to do extraordinary things in your life. But you're faced with the same pivotal moment that this woman was faced with. What is she going to do with it? Is she going to continue to make decisions based off of her own understanding, or is she going to trust God and take a courageous step of faith?
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's message, be sure to share it with your friends and tag us at TransformTLH. Thanks again for listening, and we look forward to seeing your face in the place someday. Have a great week.